make a start today. So I see there's a comment coming through about muted. Please do check the chat. Everybody's got access to the chat there. So we're underway. So hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Russell Irwin. I'm a principal consultant at Turner & Townsend. So I'm part of your delivery team in the project support and assurance workstream. So on the call today, we have other members of the delivery partner team from Arup, PwC and Turner & Townsend, as well as colleagues from the delivery agent Salix. So this is one of a series of SHDF grant recipient group engagement sessions that we're running, that you've been invited to. These sessions will provide you with information to support you to deliver your SHDF Wave 2.1 project. Today we'll be covering governance, escalation and change control, and this session will provide you with a high-level overview of these processes. So the format of today will be a 30-minute presentation, followed by a question panel, which is related to today's content. So this panel will also last about 30 minutes, and the session will be recorded and we'll make it available to everybody after the session, and the slides will also be circulated for you to refer back to. So we are going to take questions during the presentation in the chat, so please add those questions into the chat as we go along. So these will be directed to the Q&A panel at the end, but as a reminder, any project-specific questions should be directed to your SPOC in the first instance. So if you want to talk about your project specifics, keep those for your one-to-one engagement sessions. Today we're looking at high-level principles, so if you could focus on those, please. So you've also got access to your regional lead, so the contact information has been circulated. So if you are in the phase 2 of the kickoff meetings, please refer to your regional lead. So the audience today's session, obviously your cameras and mics have been disabled just to help us run the process, but these will be re-enabled once the question panel begins. Okay, so just as a reminder there, slides and recordings will be made available afterwards in the follow-up email. So right now, I'm going to hand over to our first presenter. I'm going to hand over to Katie.
Thanks, Russell. Hi everyone, welcome to the session today. I'm going to briefly give you an overview of the governance and escalation outline, and then I'll be handing over to my colleague Leanne to talk you through change control. Next slide, please. Right, so let me start with governance. You may have seen this slide already. We have shown this in a number of the previous seminars, but just to briefly recap the governance. The Department for Energy Security and Net Zero is the ultimate accountable body for this work. The SHDF Wave 2 delivery team sits within that department, and its role is to process and distribute grant funds directly to grant recipients. Then reporting into the department is the delivery agent, Salix Finance, who have been appointed by the department as the sole contract manager for the grant administration service. And they have procured us as the delivery partner for the grant administration service provider. As part of our role, we make available a single point of contact for you, the grant recipients, and it's through that single point of contact that you will be engaging with the rest of the governance in the area. That single point of contact is in the name, but it will be your first avenue for any discussions in relation to the fund and the SHDF fund. Next slide, please. To recap on the SPOC role, initially we'll be supporting the development of relationships with yourselves as the grant recipients, and what this will involve is an initial kickoff meeting, which is followed by regular engagement so that we can understand the delivery progress, discuss the risks and issues that are arising from your projects, and propose potential mitigations for them that you can seek to enact. We'll also be undertaking risk reviews and risk monitoring on projects, particularly having a look at the emerging themes that sit across the programme. and we'll be reviewing and assessing monthly data before completing the delivery confidence assessment, which looks at your specific project and the context around it. Further on, we'll provide additional further support and assurance through the SPOCs as the first point of contact. So we'll be participating with ourselves and Salix Finance as the delivery agent in order to discuss things like project progress, changes, potential remediation action, and then trends and themes across the scheme. So we'll be looking at the emerging elements that come out across the schemes in order to give a sense of where we might be able to best intervene. We'll be attending and supporting additional meetings beyond the monthly regular check-in to address technical issues, potentially provide direct advisory support where it's identified as needed, or respond to challenges in the projects through remedial action. We'll then be participating in your governance or assurance boards as required or as requested. Next slide, please. So it might be helpful to briefly talk through the escalation process. In effect, we are escalating issues and challenges so that we can ensure that you, as the grant recipients, are in receipt of the best possible support. So each month we'll have a project DCA that is signed off by us as the delivery partner, and through that we RAG rate each of the projects. This enables us to then undertake a review of the projects against the KPIs and the DCA against key identified triggers in order to get a sense of whether there's any deviation from the baseline or from the expected program. Once we've undertaken that review, we will make a recommendation to SALEX on the potential interventions if a deviation has been identified. And those interventions could include things like a change control, for example, like the provision of direct advisory support, so technical assistance that you may require, or potentially a remediation plan in extreme cases. So that decision will be referred to Salix as the delivery agent, and following the decision, we will work with you to implement the actions of the varieties that I've just explained, and then work with you to monitor whether those actions have helped to improve the process for your project and whether you are moving back into a more favourable position for your programme. Next slide, please. We'll hand over to Leanne now to give some more details about the change control element of that process.
Great, thanks so much, Katie, and welcome everyone. So let me take you through the change control process. First of all, just to say that as grant recipients, we understand that you are likely to experience changes, and these changes will require approval as you work to implement your project. And our role is to support you with that process. And each of you will be working with a dedicated SPOC to support you through any change control process that's required. First of all, just speaking briefly about the principles of the change control. So we understand that change is highly likely, but we also want to make sure that we're supporting you to deliver against the aims of your project. We want to support you in delivering the impact intended. So making sure that the number of homes rated EPC-C are delivered, that you are reaching your carbon savings and also reaching your bill savings as well. So all of the changes that come to us for consideration will be reviewed with those principles in mind. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. In terms of the change control requests, again, understanding that we know that you're likely to request some changes to your project as you implement, and we are working to understand the impact that any change may have. We'll be working within some policy red lines, and as a result, there is a formal process that is in place to make sure that we are understanding the basis for the change, that change is within the policy red lines and that it's not overstepping and that it remains eligible, and that also those changes changes don't alter the ultimate impact of your project. So this is something that your SPOC will play a critical role in supporting you with, and there will be reference back to your project baseline throughout. So we understand that as you implement your scheme over an extended period, there may be changes that arise on a fairly regular basis, but we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of your original project baseline. So again, this is all within the eligibility rules and the policy requirements as laid out by the department, and which you built your project around. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the benefits, the change control process is there to support you. We don't want to make life difficult. We understand that you're keen to progress and progress at pace. However, we do need to make sure that any change that you are considering is known to us. And please, if I can stress that when you're working with your SPOC, if you can make them aware of any change coming up, we're really keen to get early warnings of any change. There may be opportunity for us to explore alternative courses of action or mitigate some issues that you're experiencing that would avoid a change to your project. However, in the event where a change is required, we would ask that you discuss this with your SPOC. They are your first point of contact, and they will really guide you on what's required and take you through the appropriate approvals. So the SPOC will ask you, first of all, to complete a project change request form. And this is really a really critical aspect of us being to understand and then also assess the impact of any change that you are requesting. What we're anticipating is that you may have changes around possible landlord types. There may be questions around the number of homes, changes around the number of homes. You may have some questions and some changes in relation to your overall project costs. And the SPOC will make sure that any change that you are considering is taken and approved within the eligibility rules and requirements for the scheme. In terms of the overall benefits, whilst the process is there to support, the process is also there to make sure that we are all moving with a shared understanding and that the impact or likely impact on the scheme is not negative. So again, it'll be going back to those core principles of the scheme in terms of making sure that the number of homes that we're working to deliver are achieved, that we're seeing carbon savings, and that we're also seeing bill savings as well. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. So this slide is probably most relevant for those of you who are already in implementation, for those of you who are planning and have dates in the diary to meet with your SPOC from July onwards. So really, we are trying to make sure that we're supporting you, that where you know you have a potential change that needs to be supported, please, we're asking you to just follow this interim process. So we would ask that you contact your regional lead and they will provide you with some initial support. We will then be working with SALEX and DESNES in terms of issuing you with a project change request form. You will then, as grant recipients, you will complete that change request form, it will then come back to your SPOC, who will be the key person in assessing and reviewing the change requested, making sure that all of the change does not impact negatively on your intended benefits of your project. And then once we're content that it falls within the guidelines and eligibility, then we will take this through the necessary approvals. And there's opportunity, depending on the size and nature of the change, then approval will be given by a combination of SALEX or DESNZ. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a little bit around what triggers a project change. Usually what we're seeing are changes in relation to eligibility. We're seeing some changes relating to the time frame. We may see some changes relating to the household measures and the mix of household measures that you're proposing. You may also have some changes to your consortium and groups that you're working with, and there may be some changes in terms of the value of your grant, maybe an impact of some of your match and co-funding. You may also wish to make changes or adjustments to the number of your forecasted homes to be upgraded. So these are the types of changes that we anticipate that you may need at various points in implementing your project. And as I said, we will be working with the SPOCs and referring back to the eligibility requirements and also the policy red lines for each and any change that is requested. So again, it's very clear, and you'll know this from working on building your individual projects. There are very clear requirements in relation to the location, the landlord type, the eligible properties for this scheme, as well as a minimum requirement around the number of homes that you're expected to work with. There's also clear guidelines around the project costs. So thinking about the costs that are eligible within this scheme, those are clearly stated and have been shared with you. You've also been provided with clear parameters around the admin costs and keeping those below the 15%. You're also you may have some changes around your co-funding or your cost caps, and we would look to make sure that we are keeping all changes within the rules of what is eligible and managing the impact to your project overall. There are some additional considerations around the installers that you work with and the requirements around meeting their quality standards. So again, we understand that you may need to make some changes to this aspect of your project, but we would ask that this change is that we are given early warning of these types of changes. And all of this is done in order to support you in delivering and achieving the intended benefits of your project. So again, the point I would stress is that this process is not there to slow you down or delay you in any point, but it's making sure that all decisions that we're taking are in line with the requirements and will deliver the intended benefits and positive impacts in terms of carbon savings and bill savings also. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. So this is a little bit on roles and activities, and I think it's just really important to recognise that as grant recipients, you have a role to play in supporting the change control process. The better the information provided to us and explanation provided to us and provided to your SPOC, then the easier and more straightforward the change control approval process will be. So what I would say as grant recipients, if you can please, and again, just stressing the importance of working with your SPOC and notifying them of any potential risks or challenges as soon as they arise. Your SPOC will then support you through the process in terms of making sure that you're bringing the right information and that you're completing the project change request as required. The SPOC will also work behind the scenes to make sure that they're supporting your request through the relevant approval process. So they will work to make sure that the information they have is robust. It can be, and they're able to stand over any change that is recommended, and then we will take it through the relevant approvals. And this will help make sure that we are all operating within the guidelines, both policy and eligibility wise. Okay, if you can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, the role of the delivery partner. So our role as delivery partner is to work with you. And as I said, your first point of contact is the SPOC. And we are here to work with you and to support you as the grant recipient to identify any issues, any risks that you're experiencing very early on, so that we can look at whether there are options available to you or whether we are looking at a more formal change request on your project. So I would say continue to speak when you meet with your SPOCs, share with them any emerging risks or issues that you're experiencing. This will give us early sight and may help us manage and mitigate the need for a change control. But as delivery partner, where a change request is needed, and we understand there may be many occasions where change happens, we are here to support you to complete the project change request. And then we will be making sure that we are running and scheduling regular change control panels and boards so that decisions are processed quickly and decisions are taken and reported back to you swiftly. Again, I think it's really important to stress that we're not wanting to see this as causing an interruption to your implementation, but it is here as a support mechanism to make sure that you are progressing and implementing in line with the policy, regulations and eligibility rules. So please do take this as the support mechanism in which it is intended. And if I can move on to the next slide, please. And then finally, the role of the delivery agent. Again, we are working closely with the delivery agent, Salix, to make sure that we are managing and taking change requests to them in a timely manner, in a well-evidenced manner. And their role is to support us with that process and to make sure that we are both bringing decisions timely and those decisions are being taken on our regular change control boards. There may be instances if a change is particularly complex or substantive, then it may well be the case that the change is escalated to a more formal change control board. But as I said, in terms of your change, the SPOC will be your main point of contact who will guide you through the process end to end. If we can move on, Russell, thank you. Okay, and again, this is reiterating the sort of and articulating the activities linked to the role of the grant recipient. So again, we really need you to work with us to make sure that you are informing us of a potential change at the earliest. We are also requiring that you work with us to complete your change control request in line with the guidance, and the SPOC is there to support you with that. And making sure if there are questions and any follow-up is needed, that you are responding to us in a timely manner. But if we can please request that information is provided to us in its fullest at the outset, then that will bring ease to the process of processing and approving the change that you require. Okay, if you can move on to the next slide, please. Then in terms of the activities of the delivery partner, we will receive your change request. We will work with you so that we fully understand the full scope of the change that you're requiring. We will also review it to make sure that we're content that no policy red lines have been overstepped. And we will then take your change control form and we will take it through the relevant approval processes. And we do have weekly boards in place to support us with that. So to reassure you that we understand that there's a need for timely approvals and that you are keen to have no interruption to your implementation. So we have regular boards in place to make sure that we are considering and processing approvals in a timely manner. And we obviously, as delivery partner, we play a role in updating you on the outcome of the change request, and this will come via your SPOC. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. There we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leanne. So we are at the question panel time. We're going to be joined by Katie, who spoke first, Leanne, and also Corey Mason, who is in charge of the project. So she will be taking the lead on some of these questions. What we're going to do is, obviously, remember today's QA is related to the content here, so we're going to focus on the change control process. Just to reiterate, if you have any project-specific queries, raise them with your SPOC where you've been linked up for tranche 1, tranche 2, raise them with your regional lead. We're going to use the function, so there's lots of questions come through there. I'm going to pick some out, and there's some general ones, some process ones. I'll invite you to come in and ask your question, and then one of the panel will put a hand up to see who is going to come in and take that question. Okay. So, first one we got through is from Tichong. It's regarding the red lines. Do you want to come in and ask that one?
Hi. What are the red lines? Are they linked to those key outputs of improving dwellings, carbon savings, and spend? I believe that you mentioned. It'll be good if we have clarity on this, because a lot of it depends on our relationship with the SPOC, and I don't believe we've been assigned one yet and have arranged meetings. And then we have the regional leads, and what happens if the regional lead falls under a bus? It's kind of this.
So just focus on the red lines part of the question first. Leanne, is that something that you could come in on that one, and I'll take the operational piece?
Sure, thanks so much, and thanks for the question. In terms of red lines, I'd refer you back to, if you go back to the information provided on the government website in relation to the eligible measures, and then there's also links to the funding and the eligible costs. So it's really very clear on the government website what the requirements are in terms of your project and as the grant recipient. And certainly your project will have been assessed to make sure that it meets all of the eligibility requirements and that no policy red lines are, and that it's being delivered within the policy red lines. And then the sort of the principles that we talked about, that's sort of your overarching impact as a result of implementing, you know, a number of measures in the number of homes that you've outlined. So the carbon savings and obviously the bill savings. But for example, if you need to make a change and say perhaps reduce the number of homes that you're working with, we know that there's likely to then be a negative impact on carbon savings and on the bill savings. So it's our job to make sure that we're working with you to understand the impact of that change and to really try and make sure that we're taking as much action as possible to mitigate against it. Because we're obviously wanting to make sure that the scheme overall reaches its intended benefits. But Chit, if you can have a look back on the government website, you will see, and they have provided with a clear outline in relation to all of the eligibility costs and all of the eligible measures as well.
Okay, so just regarding the operational piece for the SPOC there, Chit, as well. So your first point of contact is your SPOC where you've been allocated one. If you haven't been allocated one, if you're in tranche 2, then it will be the regional lead. And I think, as you said, if the regional lead falls under a bus, very unfortunate for us. But obviously we do have the management team here. So myself, I'll be the next point of escalation, and from me it would be Corey, and then from there we have escalation up through to our colleagues in Salix as the delivery agent. Okay.
Okay. It's just that when we get down to doing our actual surveys, I know we're going to find data gaps, and it's going to say, we thought we could install this, we can't. How about this? If there's something that is a recipe book that says it's pretty automatic, then it'll help us plan.
Gotcha. Yep.
Yep.
Totally understand. Thank you very much. Next question we got in was from Charlotte Tutton regarding tolerances for evaluating KPIs.
It was basically we're quite a large consortia, and in wave 1 we had reports from each of our consortia members and sort of used their baselines to compare to the actuals and had sort of tolerance levels to flag it as red, amber and green. And it was just whether you have certain tolerance levels when you're looking at the reports, and whether we can have those sort of align would be useful if you have a percentage tolerance that you're looking at, as there's obviously going to be some variation to the baseline, but what is considered unacceptable and what is acceptable variance. So if you have that would be really useful, because then we can use that in our consortia to sort of check with them.
Was that shared by the department with you previously on previous funding?
I don't know. I wasn't in the team at the time it was decided, but I think it's sort of just
the quick answer to that one is yes, we do have those tolerances. Those tolerances are built into the requirements of the department. We don't have that information to share with you in a format at the moment, so we'll take that one away. We'll speak to the department to see if that's possible or not.
Yeah, it'd just be useful, because then we're checking with our consortium members that they're within them too. So
Leanne, is there anything you want to add to that one?
I guess, Charlotte, I would stress that in terms of change, we are required to take all changes. If you can bring all changes to your SPOC, there is obviously then a process for making sure that we're managing. However, I would say that in terms of tolerances, they're incredibly low. in terms of this project. Again, it's wanting to make sure that A, we're supporting you, but B, that we're delivering against the intended benefits of the scheme overall. So, you know, when there's a tolerance, there's always a risk that, you know, we can move below what we had originally planned. So really what the change control process will do is support you to make sure that we are exploring all options to help to make sure that you're delivering against the project that you have designed and developed and received approval and funding for. And so just making sure that that process is managed. Now, there may be instances where change is significant and substantive, and then absolutely that at that point we would be taking it through the process, the relevant process, and most likely for substantive changes that would involve both the delivery agent, SAILEX, and the department as well.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. It was just, you know, if there's like 1 or 2% or up to 10%, like generally I think is okay. But if it's over that, that's when we start to flag with our consortium members and ask what's going on. So yeah, it's just, if you've got it, then it's useful to know.
Yeah, I would say, Charlotte, please bring all changes. Even if you consider them to be small, please bring all changes to your SPOC in the first instance, and they will guide you through the process.
Yeah, no worries.
Joanna, I can see you've got your hand up. Is that something you want to come in on this point, or is it a separate point? So, you're just on mute there.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, my internet froze for a second there, just as it was coming to the end. My sort of question is, not question, but on the back of sort of the 2 questions that have just been. With what we submitted in the bid, obviously what came across was obviously only the first part of the postcode. We have a strong reserve list to sort of back up those properties that may drop out through what Chip was saying, that you actually get there and find the measures aren't there. Would that constitute a change request or not? Because obviously the property list per se hasn't been confirmed. You obviously just got the postcode and the number of properties and the number of measures. So the measures yet aren't actually attributed to the property. They're attributed to the funding. And obviously we were what we were expecting to do is to obviously, as we went through the areas and started to get the retrofit surveys, with what we'd expect, we could then see where we are. And then when we hit a threshold, then we were expecting to put that change request through to obviously govern what needs to be there. I can totally see the point of speaking with your SPOC to make them aware of where you are hitting those and where you're not, to have that sort of abreast. But is that a change control, or is that actually just a regular meeting update, just so it's provided and written down that it's there, that when that change request then comes in, that obviously it has been minuted or documented that where you kind of were?
Gotcha. Yeah. Does anybody from the panel want to come in? Because I can take that one if not. Okay, so your long list of addresses, it will be expected that you'll be going through that long list. So if the addresses you are targeting and are changing through dropouts are for the same measure mix that you're proposing in your bid, that's not a change request. That's tracked through your KPIs and your milestones. If it got to the point where you'd exhausted all of those addresses and you were looking to find new addresses with new measures, that would then be a change to your project. That would be change control.
Yeah. So kind of the sort of the process I was thinking is kind of the right aspect.
So it's accepted that you will have that filtering through of your long list of addresses to get the point where you're hitting the aims of the project. It's only if you deviate away from that, or the style of homes, or what it is you're looking to do. If you're moving from houses to flats and you're looking at the range of your EPC performance was miles away from what you'd said you were going to be targeting, then that would be a different conversation. But you can pick that up with the SPOC through those regular meetings to see whether that is an early warning of a potential for a change control, or whether it's we've got a point where we've exhausted everything, it's now change.
Yeah. Okay. So what we were kind of planning on, sort of how to work, was the right way to sort of manage it and work through it, and just it's that regular meeting and just tracking your project.
Do share that information with your SPOC. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
We had a question from David Colburn. David, was regarding the change request form.
Yeah, just the physical form. What's it going to look like? I expect it's going to be based on some of the documents we've already completed, but for process, we're trying to develop with legal a simple way of doing updates in terms of grant funding agreements with our partners. So if we knew it was based on the baseline template and the supplementary tab for that RP, then we could just include that as 2 appendixes, and they said if there's a change, we just update it to version 2, and then the grant funding agreement, if you like, the changes, these are variation, all the legal talk that I love to include could be avoided. It could be really simplified just if we know what the form's based on. I realise there'll be other sections on it asking about why are you doing this change, what highlight the changes, what's the impact. But if we knew what the basic physical characteristics are based
Gotcha.
on, that would be helpful.
So is that in a form we can share at the moment, Leanne? Is that?
So David, unfortunately, we haven't received the final approved version of that, but look, I will note the importance of and how helpful that could be to grant recipients, and we will share that in due course, hopefully very shortly with you.
Great. Thank you. Charlotte, you had another question about the change control process, about the board timings. Do you want to ask that one?
Yeah, so just something we found with our Wave 1 program is that if a change need to go to a change board, they were only sort of once a month, and occasional additional ones where they had, change requests to go through, and not having sort of those frequent meetings of that change board meant lots of delays in terms of the project. So for example, we needed to submit a change request 7 working days before a board, and if we missed that deadline, we'd have to wait an entire month before it could be seen again. And we did have an instance where one of our consortium members stopped work for 3 months because they were waiting for a change board outcome.
Gotcha. Yeah, that would be
frustrating. For more
frustrating.
information.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just if you have we want to try and get these approved within 30 days or anything
so
like
Leanne, that looks like another one for you. Do you have information to share with Charlotte?
Yeah, that's another one for me. I think Charlotte, just to reassure you that certainly we understand the need to balance the formal review and approvals piece, and not wanting to interrupt implementation. I mean, we are working to take on the lessons learned from previous schemes and make sure that we're putting processes and structures in place to avoid such bottlenecks. What I would say is, yes, we as the delivery partner, we are working to very clearly defined SLAs in relation to change control, to avoid a scenario where work could be interrupted, or a decision could take, weeks and months in reaching you. So we have very clearly defined SLAs that we will work to in terms of processing a change request, and we will be reporting and monitoring against that. What I would say very selfishly as the delivery partner, what we find is that our ability, the ease of the process is very much helped when we have robust evidence provided to us at the outset. So I think that this is where, working closely with your SPOC to make sure that they have what's needed in order to take it to those approvals and take those decisions with ease. But yes, we have a process whereby it's broken down into various stages, and there are a clear number of SLA linked to a number of days processing that we will be working to achieve. So we are being measured very closely on this element.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you, Charlotte. So there's a couple here which are quite similar. Michael Ramsey, you asked about sort of the changes at consortium level. and how that's tracked? Can I ask that one?
Yeah, sure. So Michael Ramsey from Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So we've got 18 partners and 5,500 properties. So I was asking about the tolerances. So it's similar to Charlotte's question from before. If there's any tolerances on changes. As I said, we've got 5,500 properties. So there might be cases where 20 properties need to change their measures. And is that a full change request process, or is there a more informal approach where it can be approved? Because otherwise we'll be constantly doing change requests, because we have found them on wave one to be quite a bottleneck, and by the time they've been approved the data has changed again and we've had to do another one. So it's been a sort of a constant process. There's quite small changes at a consortium level.
Thanks Michael. I would say as it stands, the all changes do need to be discussed with your SPOC. So I think this is where the early warning can become helpful, in that, you know, if there are options available to you to, you know, explore a course of action that would perhaps help mitigate a formal change request, then the SPOC would guide you in relation to that. But as it stands, yes, we are expecting for all changes to come, you know, and again, this links back to those overarching principles around whilst we know that change is likely to happen, you know, we have a role to play in making sure that we're not impacting negatively on the carbon savings or on the eventual bill savings as well. So look, I recognise that there's a complexity to managing, you know, large consortiums, and certainly we are working to make sure that we are set up to support this process and not create those bottlenecks, and very much learn from, you know, previous schemes.
Thank you very much for that one. I think there was similar actually from Kevin Yates. Your question was also about consortium, so hopefully that answers that. Sometimes it may be just be timing. You may have a number of requests that come through from consortium members at the same time that can be packaged up together, and that would be a single change request. But if we've got notices, Leanne says, through the early warnings, that'll assist in managing that for the timings. Okay, so we have a question from Richard Gill regarding funding. Richard, do you want to ask that one? You're still on mute there, Richard, if you just want to go again.
Oh yeah, Richard Gill from Islington Council. My question is regarding co-funding. Obviously, with inflation being pretty volatile at the moment, there's a chance that our co-funding will increase to absorb that that inflation, which sort of will have no effect on the outcomes of the project and will have no effect on anything from DESNZ's side. Would that still require a change request?
Richard, yes, it may well require a change request. I'd say have a look again at the guidance, government guidance there, because in relation to the this will sort of fall into the project costs, and there is a requirement that in terms of co-funding, it's at a minimum of 50%. If that is not impacted, then you, in that scenario, you may not be looking at a formal change request. But if that policy red line around the minimum 50% of the co-funding, then yes, you're likely to be looking at a formal change request.
I'm talking specifically about our co-funding increasing to account for
inflation.
So
that, on that point, Richard, I think you would be okay. But again, just make sure it's documented through your one-to-one engagements, and so we can just track those percentages. Brilliant. So that we're absolutely sure that, you know, the funding doesn't drop.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Corey, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I was just going to add to a wider point around the point you made there, Richard, around inflation. Reiterate what Russell and Leanne were saying there in terms of inform your SPOC, if you're seeing that coming through your supply chain. And I think even if it isn't triggering a change request, because it's not within the parameters for a change request, it's a really important early warning notice, because we have seen on projects previously that there can be knock-on impact through the inflationary pressures that are happening in the market to other things related to the project. So it's really, really useful for the SPOCs to have sight of that, even if it's not triggering a change request.
Because we hate to see that funding then disappear, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, so a few minutes left. Let's have a look, see what we've got in left. I think we've had some queries about individual measures. I think obviously we covered that very early on in the chat about tracking those measures. I think there's one coming to the chat just recently. So Adam Denny, do you want to ask your question?
Put that back on. Yeah, it's just regarding my interpretation. I think it's partly been answered, but my interpretation for wave 2. So we've got 2,000 properties we're doing or thereabouts. We've assumed we're going to do EWI, loft installation, ventilation, etc. We go to number 4 Arcadia Avenue, and actually that loft installation is already at 300 mil, 350 or whatever. So we didn't actually have to do the loft installation on that property, so we're only actually installing 3 measures instead of 4. Never took that as a change request thing. And then likewise, we made assumption on doors based on stock condition records, but actually because of the configuration of an outhouse or something like that, we may have to include additional doors and windows, and there just as part of that process we would just carry on with that anyway.
So the balance there is the property hitting the target for overall performance, the increase in its EPC. And if you've already got a measure that's installed like loft insulation, then yes, you would just note it as a change in your one-to-one meetings. And at the end,
that's fine.
It's a balance, because you may find one where you may not have loft insulation, but you've assumed it, and it would balance itself out. So your spend profile will track through. So there's a minutiae changes, but ultimately it's the property performance that we need to be sure that measures equals performance that leads to the grant funding group.
It's more likely to be the lesser measures, things like that, which we haven't gone round and surveyed every property with loft insulation. That's fine. Okay, thanks.
Great. So coming down to the last few minutes, just scanning the last of the chat. I think we've covered pretty much all the themes. Obviously, we've had a few questions about the SPOC network, and I see there's been some answers posted in the chat there. We've reiterated your contact details. We've covered process, we've covered measures, we've covered funding. I think we've hit everything that we need to on there. We've covered tolerances and KPIs. I think all the themes are covered. So we will go through all of the questions after the session, and where there are any answers we need to highlight for further follow-up, we'll do that. I can see there's a hand up in the chat. Just obviously opportunity for anybody's got the hand up. Joanne?
Yeah, hi, Joanne Wright from the Southwest Net Zero Hub. There's a really great opportunity here after working with Ricardo on 3 previous projects to get to SHDF 2.1. And what I've seen over the past 3 projects is this increased governance based on a number of reasons, and I know why they've added additionality. But a change request at the moment is going to the SPOC. It could actually go to a technical lead to a SPOC, to the senior SPOC, to the DESNES person, to their senior DESNES person, who then takes it to the board. There's 6 desks there. What I'm seeing is everybody has a personal point of view, and I will get that thrown back at me with, can you add a little bit more information about this? They're not material information. It's not saying to me, change a number, all the numbers are the same. It's saying, you know, what about this? What about that? Maybe this, maybe that. They're very personal, I believe, points of view. And I've got a particular change request now that's taken probably 3 months of backwards and forwards, in fact, longer than that. We need to streamline this because you're asking for more information now. And it really should be my experience as a project manager, a technical change. It's not a write the best story, make sure your punctuation's okay, that kind of thing. It should be fundamentally material content and moved quickly. And what we're getting is all of those seats, so 5 or 6 desks before it's even gone to the board, and then the board may say, well, answer this question. I think all of these desks in between yourself and the board are delaying the process, which the board may be able to answer the question substantially.
I can totally understand that would be really frustrating, Joanne. So what we are looking to do is set the SPOCs up so that when we see these early warnings, we can gather that information out and make sure that the change request is as full and complete as it needs to be. So there's less for the SPOC to do. It literally will go into the system. It will go to we want to get off our desk and through the process and into the hands of the decision makers as quickly as possible. So that's what we're aiming to do. So yes, we will take those frustrations and we will feed them back into the conversations we're having about the development process. Corey, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, just a quick one, and then it may well be Leanne, you want to come in as well. Or maybe not. The governance process that Russell set out earlier, where he talked about the SPOC and the governance above the SPOC being the regional leads, and then Russell and myself, he wasn't talking us through the change control process there. He was just giving you a bit of a view as to the governance setup within the team. The change request form doesn't need to go through each of those steps. And perhaps, Leanne, it might just be worth reiterating the key points and the key steps that the change request form does go through.
Sure, and look, thanks for sharing your concerns, Joanne. In terms of the change request, it will not go through 6 levels, depending on the nature of the change that is being requested. It could well be that the approval can happen at the SPOC level, right? That those low-level changes that do not need to go any further through the system. However, there may be a requirement for it to go to a SALEX board where a decision would be made. So that would be from your SPOC to the board. Or if it is a particularly complex or substantive change, then we would be looking at it going from the SPOC to the more formal change board with the department. So we're not seeking to take you through 5 steps. However, I would say, look, you know, there can be instances where more additional information is required. And this is where having that point of contact, working with your SPOC, we see that as bringing ease and support to you in taking any change through a process and for that decision making to happen quickly. So certainly we would want to avoid any scenario where we can that there is a long delay to you receiving a decision on your change.
Brilliant.
Can we also stop as well the practice of merging, particularly for consortium members, and I'm sure there's some consortium leads on here now, of merging change requests together. This often delays consortium members being able to progress because we've been requested to reduce the number of change requests by merging change requests together. This is quite difficult to do sometimes, especially where you've got a particularly challenging consortium member. I had one that changed their numbers from 117 to 58 to 78 to 25 to 35, and that held up 3 more consortium members because we were requested to put that through as one change request. If the consortium member asks, so we said, can we put them through separately? It will really help our process, and we were told no. And what I would like is that if we as project managers believe that they need to go through separately, that is adhered to, rather than being forced down a process that makes the project run at risk.
Gotcha, Joanne. I'm conscious of time. We're at the end of the session today, but it's a valid point that we will obviously take on board. We need to draw today's session to a close. So before you go, there will be a poll that Kayla's going to put up in the chat there. So if you can all take a moment before you leave the call. Obviously, if you do have any feedback on today's session, you've got Kayla's contact details. Please feed that back. As I said, all the information is in the chat. We'll pick that out and you will be circulated copies of the slides and link to the recording for your records afterwards. So just to say thank you all very much again. It's been really good to hear your points of view and hear what your challenges are, so we can work with you on those. So that is the end